Exodus 1876 BC, Exodus 1. So Jacob and his sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and all their families moved to Egypt. The total children of Israel that traveled to Egypt were 70. Joseph and his children were already in Egypt. They prospered and grew in number. Joseph and the 70 died over the years, and their descendants became very wealthy. The new king of Egypt did not know about Joseph and what he had done for the Egyptians in the past. He thought the Israelites would become greater than the Egyptians, and they might take over the land. So the Egyptians made slaves of the Israelites and had them make brick and mortar for building the cities of Pithom and Ramses. The Israelites continued growing in size, and the new Pharaoh continued to oppress them rigorously. Pharaoh also told the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, to kill any newborn males. The midwives did not do what Pharaoh had asked because they feared God. God gave the midwives a family of their own because they had followed God's law rather than the law of Pharaoh, Exodus 1:21. Thou shalt not murder, Exodus 20:13. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart, Jeremiah 1:5. So Pharaoh made an edict that all male Hebrew babies must be thrown in the river. Exodus 2, 1526 BC. A Hebrew woman from the tribe of Levi had a male child, and she tried to hide him for 3 months. She made a floating basket from bulrushes and pitch when she could no longer hide him. She placed her baby in the basket and put him in the river. Pharaoh's daughter found the baby and sent it to the Hebrew mother to nurse it until it could be brought back to become her son. Later, the mother brought the baby back to Pharaoh's daughter, who named him Moses because she had drawn him out of the water. Pharaoh's daughter, who could have been Hatshepsut, based on the timeline, raised Moses, and he was a prince and high official in Pharaoh's court. The Pharaoh at that time may have been Thutmose I. Later, Moses saw an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew man, and he killed him and buried him in the sand. Pharaoh heard of this, and he sent men to kill Moses. Moses fled to Midian, and when he got there, he stopped at a well. Midian's priest had 7 daughters who came to the well to water their flock. Some shepherds drove them away from the well, but Moses offered help and watered their flock. The daughters brought Moses to their father, Reuel, who fed Moses and allowed him to stay at their home. Later, Reuel, also known as Jethro, gave Moses his daughter Zipporah for a wife, and she had a son they named Gershom. The king of Egypt eventually died, and a new Pharaoh came to power. The Hebrews called to God to take them out of bondage, so God looked down on the children of Israel and had compassion for them. Exodus 3:14-45 BC. Moses was out tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, priest of Midian. Jethro means His Excellency. His real name was Reuel. Moses led the flock to the edge of the desert and saw the mountain of God, Mount Sinai. He saw a burning bush, and the flames did not consume the bush. God called from the bush and told Moses to remove his shoes because he was standing on holy ground. God told Moses from the burning bush that he was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God told Moses that he would send him back to Egypt to convince Pharaoh to release the Israelites, Exodus 3:10, fulfilled, Exodus 17:6. Moses asked God, who was he to approach Pharaoh? God told him that he would be with him. Moses asked, who should I say sent me? God said, I am that I am. Tell them that I am sent you, the God of your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Scholars have many interpretations of what I am that I am means, but they all agree that God's name indicates that He is eternal and does not depend on anyone, is self-existent. He will always be present, has no beginning nor no end, and has sovereignty over all creation. I think the best explanation is if you were asked who you are, and if you wanted to describe yourself in the greatest way, you would have to say, I am created by God. When God is asked who he is, his ultimate answer is, I am that I am. He was not created. He always existed, and he created everything that exists. God told Moses to ask Pharaoh to let his people go into the desert for 3 days so they could sacrifice to their God. God said that Pharaoh would not let them go, but he would smite Egypt with all his wonders. God said that Pharaoh would eventually let his people go, and they would go with great wealth. This was fulfilled, Exodus 14:29. Exodus 4. Moses told God that Pharaoh would not believe him and would need to see signs to be convinced. God told Moses to throw his rod on the ground, and it became a snake. When Moses picked up the snake by the tail, it turned back into a rod. He also told Moses to put his hand in his shirt and to pull it out. The hand was leprous and looked white as snow. The flesh was normal when he put his hand back in and removed it. God told Moses that if the 2 miraculous signs did not convince Pharaoh, he could take water out of the river, pour it on the ground, and it would turn to blood. Again, Moses tried to escape the mission by saying he was not a good speaker. God angrily told Moses that his brother Aaron could speak for him. Moses was told to carry his rod to perform great signs for Pharaoh. God also told Moses to tell Pharaoh that Israel was his firstborn son, and that if Pharaoh did not let them go, he would kill Pharaoh's firstborn son. So Moses took his wife and son and headed to Egypt. They stopped at an inn on the way, and something extraordinary happened. God came to the inn to kill Moses, but Moses' wife circumcised their son there at the inn. Most theologians believe that God was upset with Moses because he had not circumcised his son. So God let Moses go on and told Aaron to meet Moses at Mount Sinai. The 2 brothers went together to Egypt, and Aaron told the Israelites that God had heard their cries and planned to free them. When Aaron and Moses showed them the signs they planned to use on Pharaoh, they bowed their heads and worshiped God. But God had hardened Pharaoh's heart because Pharaoh and the Egyptian people had oppressed his people for over 400 years and deserved all the plagues God had planned. Exodus 5. Aaron and Moses went to Pharaoh and told him that God wanted him to let his people go for 3 days so they could hold a feast for him. Pharaoh said, "Who is this God, and why should I obey his voice?" So Pharaoh told his taskmasters to make the Israelites cut their own straw to make the bricks, but ensure they met their quota. Pharaoh's taskmasters oppressed the Israelites more and made them work harder. Moses then complained to God that the plan was making the oppression worse. Exodus 6. God assures Moses that his people will be freed and encourages them that they will inherit the land in Canaan per his promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Exodus 6 goes on to list the lineage of the heads of the Israelite families. Exodus 7, God tells Moses that he will be like a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron shall be his prophet. God sent them back to Pharaoh to try the rod and snake sign. God warns them that he would harden Pharaoh's heart and that it would take multiple signs. So Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron was 83 when they returned to Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked them for a miracle, and Moses told Aaron to throw down the rod, and it turned into a snake. Pharaoh called all his magicians and wise men, and they were able to make their rods turn into snakes. However, Aaron's snake ate the other snakes. Then God told Moses and Aaron to return and stick the rod in the river, and the water would turn to blood. So now all the ponds, lakes, and rivers were red with blood, and all the fish died. Pharaoh's magicians could also produce blood in the water. So Pharaoh's heart was hardened again, and after the rivers had been red for 7 days, God had more instructions. Exodus 8. Next, God told Moses to go back to Pharaoh and have Aaron wave the rod to bring an infestation of frogs to cover the land of
You have
Egypt.
hardened
Again,
your
Pharaoh's
heart,
magicians could
Pharaoh.
also bring frogs. Pharaoh then told Moses to ask God to remove all the frogs. God obliged and had the frogs go into the rivers. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened again, so God had Moses infest Egypt with lice and then flies. But Pharaoh again hardened his heart, even though his magicians could not produce lice and flies. The signs and plagues did not affect the Israelite homes. God protected the land of Goshen, which the Pharaoh of Joseph's time had given the Israelites to live. Exodus 9. Next, God had all the livestock in Egypt to die except the livestock owned by the Israelites. When Pharaoh was told this, he checked to see that the Israelites' cattle were still alive. But Pharaoh's heart was still hardened, so God told Moses and Aaron to take ashes from the furnace and sprinkle them toward the heavens in front of Pharaoh. Moses did this, and a small dust fell on the whole of Egypt. This caused boils to appear on all the Egyptians. Next, God told Moses to stretch out his rod toward heaven to cause pestilence over all the land, and then he caused it to rain with great hail. So Pharaoh told Moses he would let his people go if he stopped the hail. But after Moses stopped the hail, Pharaoh changed his mind. Exodus 10. Moses and Aaron returned to Pharaoh and asked him to let their people go into the wilderness to honor their God with a feast. The Egyptians were now also pressuring Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked who would go, and Moses told him all their people, belongings, and livestock. Pharaoh told them they could only take the men and sent them away. God told Moses and Aaron that he was hardening Pharaoh's heart to show the Israelites and Egyptians his power so they would believe in him. God told them to go back to Pharaoh and wave the rod to bring locusts over all the land of Egypt. God had the east wind bring the locusts. The locust ate all the foliage from the trees and all the herbs of the fields and filled the homes of the Egyptians. Pharaoh asks Moses to ask God to take away the locusts. God had the west wind to take away the locusts and cast them into the Red Sea, but hardened Pharaoh's heart again, and he would not let them take the cattle. So God told Moses to wave his hand and cause darkness to cover all of Egypt, but not Goshen. The darkness lasted for 3 days. God hardened Pharaoh's heart again, and Pharaoh told Moses and Aaron to get out of his sight, and that if they ever saw his face again, they would die. Exodus 11. God told Moses that he had one more sign against Pharaoh and told all the Israelites to borrow silver and gold jewelry from the Egyptians and prepare for their journey. This time God would go into the midst of Egypt and cause all the firstborns in Egypt to die. This included Pharaoh's firstborn and the firstborn of all the beasts of the field. All of the plagues were foretold to Pharaoh before they happened. God had hardened Pharaoh's heart because he wanted the Egyptians to suffer through all the signs because of the hardships they had placed on the Israelites. Exodus 12, God told Moses and Aaron that this month would be the beginning of their new year. On the 10th day of the month, all households were to pick a young male lamb for a sacrifice as atonement for their firstborn male, and on the 14th day of the month they were to kill the lamb and to make sure that no bone is broken, Exodus 12:46. This Passover lamb was to be a foreshadowing of Jesus being crucified without a bone broken, fulfilled, John 19:36. The blood of the lamb was to be spread on the side doorpost and the upper doorpost of all the Israelites' houses. So that night God's Spirit would cause every firstborn to die if they did not have blood on their doorposts. God told them to roast the lambs and to eat them with unleavened bread, flat bread with no yeast. God told them that in the future they must always have the feast of unleavened bread for 7 days and celebrate the Passover. The Passover celebration will be on the 14th day of the first month through the 21st day, and it will continue forever to commemorate the day that the Israelites were freed after being in Egypt for 430 years. So the Israelites did as they were told, and that night at midnight the Spirit of God passed over the Israelite homes, but the Egyptian firstborn died. So the Israelites gathered their cattle, took the gold and silver jewelry they had borrowed from the Egyptians, and started their journey to Canaan. The people of Israel still celebrate the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread today. Exodus 13:14-46 BC. God gives further instructions for the Passover memorial celebrations in the future. Then Pharaoh let them go, and God led them. Moses took Joseph's bones as he had promised. God led the Israelites by a cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. He led them around the land of the Philistines because if there was a battle, the Israelites might want to go back to Egypt. So God led them the longer way toward the wilderness of the Red Sea. They encamped at Ethan on the edge of the wilderness. The 70 Israelites who entered Egypt had grown to 600,000 men, not counting women and children. All told, over 2 million Israelites left Egypt around 1446 BC. Exodus 14, God told Moses to encamp near Pi-hahiroth between Migdol and the Red Sea. They encamped by the sea, directly opposite Baal-zephon. God said he would harden Pharaoh's heart again so that he would know he was God. Pharaoh gathered all his chariots and men and came to Baal-zephon. All the Israelites were afraid, and they were angered with God because they thought they would die there in the wilderness. God's cloud was between the Egyptians and the Israelites, casting darkness toward the Egyptians and light toward the Israelites. So God told Moses to hold his rod out toward the sea, and a strong wind blew all night, and it parted the sea so the Israelites could cross on dry ground. So the Israelites passed through the Red Sea with a wall of water on both sides. God removed the wheels of the chariots, but the Egyptians came across the sea anyway. God told Moses to extend the rod, and the waters covered the Egyptians, and they were all drowned. After witnessing this miracle, all the Israelites feared God and believed in him and Moses. Exodus 15. The Israelites sang a song praising God and describing the crossing of the sea and the drowning of Pharaoh's army. Miriam, Aaron's sister, led the women in dance. Moses led the Israelites into the wilderness of Shur for 3 days and found no water. They stopped at Marah, but the water there was bitter. The people complained to Moses, and he cried out to God. God showed Moses a tree and told him if he took a limb of the tree and threw it in the water, he would make the water sweet. God then promised that if the Israelites would follow his directions and do what is right in his eyes, he would keep them from the disasters he had ordered against the Egyptians. So they traveled to Elim, where there were 12 wells and 70 palm trees, and they camped by the water. Exodus 16. On the 15th day of the second month, they traveled to the wilderness of Sin, which was located between Elim and Sinai. The Israelites started complaining to Moses about the food. God told Moses he would send bread from heaven in the morning and quail in the evening. God called the bread manna and provided it for 6 days a week. On the 6th day, there was twice the amount of manna, so they would have bread on the Sabbath. They were to rest on the Sabbath and not collect the manna. God told Moses to place some manna in a container to save for the generations so they could see what God provided for their forefathers. God fed the Israelites with manna for 40 years until they came to the border of Canaan. Exodus 17. So the Israelites journeyed out of the wilderness of Sin and stopped in Rephidim, where there was no water to drink. The people were distraught with Moses for bringing them, their children, and their cattle out of Egypt to die of thirst. Moses cried to God, and God told him to go to the rock in Horeb. God stood on the rock and told Moses to hit the rock with the rod. Water came out of the rock to water the cattle and the people. They named the place Massa and Merihab because the people had tempted the Lord. He made the water flow out of the rock for them. He split the rock and the water gushed forth. Isaiah 48:21. Amalek, the grandson of Esau and head of a nomadic tribe, the Amalekites, came to fight with Israel there at Rephidim. Moses told Joshua to pick out men to go and fight Amalek. Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of a hill. Moses held the rod up in the air, and Israel prevailed. If he lowered the rod, Amalek prevailed. So Moses held the rod up with the support of Aaron and Hur. Moses was able to hold the rod up in the air until the sun went down, and Joshua defeated Amalek, Exodus 17:10-13. Moses built an altar there and called it Jehovah Nissi, Exodus 18. When Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, heard that God had led the Israelites out of Egypt, he brought Moses' wife Zipporah and 2 sons, Gershom and Eleazar, to the mountain of God to see Moses in the wilderness. Moses told Jethro of all God had done to save the Israelites from Egypt and all he had done for them during the trip. Jethro then prepared a sacrifice for the Lord and thanked him. Jethro saw all the stress Moses was under in trying to answer all the Israelites' questions and solve all their problems. He suggested that Moses delegate others to solve the issues and to teach the people the laws of God. Then only the most significant issues would come to Moses. So Moses selected rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. So the minor issues were handled by others, and Moses dealt with the significant issues. Jethro then went back to his homeland. Exodus 19, Moses led his people from Rephidim, and on the 3rd month after leaving Egypt, they arrived at Mount Sinai and set up camp at the base of the mountain. God called down to Moses from the mountain and told him to tell the Israelites that they had seen what he did to Pharaoh and how he took them out of Egypt and fed them and took care of them, and that if they followed his rules, they will be blessed and will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So Moses called all the elders and told them what God had said. They all said that they would follow the laws that God set down. Moses went back and told God. God told him to go back to the people and sanctify them and have them wash their clothes. And on the 3rd day, he would talk to the people. No one was to go up the mountain or to touch the base, because if they did, they would die. On the 3rd day, there was a thick cloud on the mountain with tremendous thunder and lightning. God came down on the mountain in a fire, and great smoke rose. God called Moses to come up the mountain. He warned Moses not to allow the people to try to come up the mountain and to go back down to warn them again, then to come back up the mountain and bring Aaron with him. Exodus 20. From the fire on the top of the mountain, and with a great voice, God told the people of Israel to follow his commandments. They are to have no graven idols, because he is a jealous God. They shall not take the name of the Lord their God in vain. They must remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. They must honor their father and their mother. They shall not kill, commit adultery, steal, or bear false witness against their neighbor. They shall not covet their neighbor's house, wife, or anything he owns. Again, thunder and lightning shook the mountain, and the people were afraid. After hearing God's thundering voice giving the 10 Commandments, the Israelites were very scared. They asked Moses to go near the mountain and get God's instructions for them, because they could not tolerate the thundering voice of God. Moses went closer to the mountain, and God told him that his people were not to make symbols of him from silver or gold, but they were to make altars of earth or stone to give burnt offerings. If the altar is of stone, it should not be hewn, because tools will pollute it, and there should be no steps up to it. Exodus 21 and 22. God gave judgments, a series of situations, and a list of how each should be handled. They are focused on the 5th and 6th commandments. Honor your father and mother, and thou shalt not kill. Exodus 23. This chapter continues with the laws and requirements. Do not corrupt the legal system by making false statements, bribes, taking advantage of low-income people, or using personal preference over facts. They are to help their enemy if they need help. They are to return their neighbor's livestock that have lost their way. They are to plant and harvest their crops for 6 years and not to plant in the 7th year. They are to work for 6 days and rest on the 7th day. They are to celebrate 3 feasts: the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Harvest, first fruits of their labor, beginning of harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering, end of harvest. All the men were to appear before God on the feast days and give a sacrifice. God would send an angel to guide them into the land of Canaan. They were to obey everything he told them to do. God would protect them, help them defeat their enemies, give them food, and take sickness away if they obeyed him. They were not to assimilate with the Canaanites or to worship their gods. God would send hornets ahead of them to torment their enemies, and he would gradually overcome them. God set their territory to be from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the desert to the river. Exodus 24. Moses wrote down God's judgments and laws and explained them to the Israelites. The Israelites all said in unison that they would follow all the rules. Moses made an altar with 12 columns to represent the 12 tribes. The young men came with offerings for the Lord. Moses took the blood of the offerings and sprinkled it on the people to make a covenant with God that they would follow his instructions. So Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders went up the mountain to see God. God stood on a paved work of sapphire stone. This was a supernatural and symbolic vision of God because no one can look on his face. They ate and drank in the presence of God to celebrate the covenant. Then God told Moses to come to the top of the mountain, and he would make stones inscribed with the 10 Commandments. Moses told the others to stay below the mountain. If anyone needed anything, they would go to Aaron or Hur. A cloud covered the mountain for 6 days. On the 7th day, God told Moses to come into the cloud, and Moses was there for 40 days and 40 nights. Exodus 25. God told Moses to have the people make him a tabernacle tent for his dwelling as they continue their trip to Canaan, and they are to make an ark made from shittim wood. The ark is to be 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. The ark was to be overlaid with gold, inside and out, with a rim of gold around the top and rings of cast gold at each corner. They will make 2 shittim wood staves overlaid with gold to carry the ark. For the top of the ark, a mercy seat made of pure gold would be made with 2 cherubim of gold to be set on top, facing each other, with outstretched wings covering the mercy seat. The stones with the 10 Commandments were to be kept inside the ark. Moses will be able to communicate with God, who will be on the mercy seat between the cherubim. They are to make a table 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 high. The table is to be overlaid with gold and have a 1-hand width gold border. Again, 4 rings and 2 staves will carry the table. They are to place the shewbread on the table. They were also to make dishes, spoons, and covers of pure gold. Next, they will make a candlestick of pure gold with 6 branches, 3 branches from one side and 3 branches from the other side of the main stem, which holds the 7th lamp. The tongs and snuff dishes are also to be of gold. Exodus 26 and 27, these chapters give extensive details on building the tabernacle tent, building the altar, and the precise locations for the ark, table, lampstand, and utensils. Exodus 28, God assigned Aaron and his sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar as priests to minister to him in the priest's office. This chapter details the ornate clothing that is to be made for Aaron and his sons. So God said that Aaron's descendants of the Levite tribe would always be the priests who would minister to God and oversee the sacrifices at the altar of God. Exodus 29. In this chapter, God gives Moses instructions on how to ordain Aaron and his sons into the priesthood and when and how to present burnt offerings at the altar of the tabernacle. Exodus 30. This chapter instructs how to build an incense altar before the veil, which divides the holy place and the most holy place in the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies. Aaron is to light the incense every morning and every evening so there would be perpetual burning. God also gave Moses the ingredients and process of making the holy anointing oil for service. Each of the Israelites was to provide a tribute of a half shekel, $5, to support the tabernacle. A large vessel of water was to be placed at the door of the tabernacle so that Aaron and his sons could wash their feet before entering. Exodus 31. God selected Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, from the tribe of Judah, and Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, from the tribe of Dan, to make all the furniture, altars, clothing for the priests, and materials for the tabernacle. God gave them wisdom and knowledge so they could make all the items. God told Moses to tell the Israelites to honor the seventh day, the Sabbath. No work is to be done on the Sabbath because God made everything in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. When God was through giving Moses all the instructions, he gave Moses 2 stone tablets with the 10 Commandments inscribed by the finger of God. Exodus 32. Moses had been on the mountain for 40 days, and the Israelites thought he was gone, so they told Aaron to make them an image to worship. Aaron collected their gold jewelry and made a golden calf. Aaron made an altar and placed it in front of the calf. God knew what they were doing, and he became so mad that he made plans to show his wrath. Moses begged God to give them another chance, took the stone tablets, and returned down the mountain. When he saw the graven image and saw them dancing around the golden calf, he threw the tablets down and broke them. He called to the people and asked who would stand with God. Only the tribe of Levites came forward. Moses told the Levites to take their swords and kill those who were not on God's side. 3,000 men were killed that day. Exodus 33. God was very upset and told Moses to take his people on to Canaan, and he would send an angel to guide them. He would drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. God is doing this because he had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he would bless their descendants. God did not want to go on with them because of their sinfulness. He told Moses that the people were stiff-necked and to tell them to remove all the gold and silver ornaments they were wearing. Moses knew he needed God's presence for the people to be successful, and he needed to do something to show repentance. Moses took his tent and separated it from the others. It was to be a temporary tabernacle because the real tabernacle had not been built. The people took off all their ornaments and stood outside their tent doors as Moses entered the tabernacle to worship God. God came down in a cloud in front of the tabernacle door. Moses asked God to forgive the people, to stay with them, to let others see that they are his special people, and for him to have a closer relationship so he could see his presence. Once again, God granted Moses what he had asked. He told Moses that he would not allow him to see his face, for any man that sees his face would die. But he would have Moses stand in the cleft of a rock and place his hand over his eyes as he passed. Then Moses would be able to see God's back. Exodus 34. God told Moses to make 2 stone tablets and bring them to Mount Sinai so he could inscribe the 10 Commandments on them to replace the broken tablets. Moses took them up, and God told him that he was now making a covenant with the Israelites, that he would be with them, and they were to take the Canaanite lands, destroy all their idols and altars, and cut down their groves. They should not assimilate with these people because they may start worshiping their gods. God reiterated everything the people must do as part of the covenant, such as keeping the feast, the Sabbath, giving sacrifices, etc. Again, Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and when he came down, his face glowed, and it scared the people, so he wore a veil except when he talked to God. So Moses called all the people and told them about the covenant agreement. He told them all that God had said and told them to start working on the tabernacle and to learn from the men God appointed from the tribe of Dan, Exodus 35 to 40. These chapters cover the building of all the furnishings for the tabernacle and the tabernacle itself. God told Moses to set up the tabernacle on the first day of the month of the second year. God came down in the cloud into the tabernacle, filled with the glory of God. When the cloud lifted, the people continued their journey toward Canaan. So from then on, they broke camp when God's cloud came up out of the tabernacle. We have now finished Exodus, the second book of the Old Testament. In summary, Jacob, Isaac's son and the grandson of Abraham, moved his family and their servants, a total of 70 people, to Egypt. They needed a place they could survive due to a great famine in the land. Jacob's son, Joseph, was a great leader in Egypt. With God's help, after being sold by his brothers to traveling merchants who were heading to Egypt, he foretold the meaning of Pharaoh's dreams and saved the Egyptian people from the great famine. Joseph, with Pharaoh's approval, invited Jacob and his family to come to Egypt. The family prospered and became a great nation of people. After Joseph passed away, a new Pharaoh came into power, and he was afraid the Israelites would become more powerful than Egypt. The new Pharaoh made the Israelites slaves, and they made bricks for the Egyptian building projects for 430 years. The Israelites had grown to more than 2 million people. Pharaoh made a mandate that all Israelite baby boys were to be killed to control the Israelite population. An Israelite woman placed her baby boy in a basket to float down the Nile River rather than being drowned by Pharaoh's soldiers. Pharaoh's daughter found the basket, named the baby Moses, and brought him up in Pharaoh's palace. After he was grown, he killed an Egyptian who was mistreating an Israelite. Moses fled Egypt and went to Midian, where he met Zipporah, and they had a son they named Gershom. The Israelites prayed to God to release them from Pharaoh's control, and God heard them. Moses was grazing his father-in-law's flock when he saw a burning bush. God called to him from the burning bush and told him to go back to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let his people go. Moses gave all kinds of excuses that he was unworthy of this request, but God assigned Aaron, Moses' brother, to help him. The two went to Pharaoh, showed him miraculous signs, and inflicted the Egyptians with many plagues. God hardened Pharaoh's heart after each plague, so he would have to endure all the plagues God had planned. This was the planned punishment for enslaving his people for 430 years. God told the people to borrow gold and jewelry from their Egyptian neighbors and prepare for their exodus. The last punishment was the death of all firstborn males in Egypt. This was called Passover. The Israelites painted their doorpost with sacrificial blood so the spirit of death would pass over their homes, saving their firstborn males. Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, and they camped at the Red Sea. God hardened Pharaoh's heart again, and Pharaoh led his army and all their chariots to destroy the Israelites who were trapped at the Red Sea. God told Moses to hold out his staff. The sea parted, and they all went across on dry ground. Pharaoh's army crossed, Moses lowered his staff, and the Egyptians drowned. After leaving Egypt, the Israelites started their complaints about food, water, and wilderness conditions of hardship. God gave them manna and quail to eat, and he turned bitter water into fresh water to drink. They traveled to the wilderness of Sin, and again they complained about water. God told Moses to strike a rock with his staff. The rock split and water gushed out. God told Moses that he would always take care of the people as long as they followed his instructions. He led them by day with a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire at night. They continued to complain and turn from righteousness. God led them on a longer route because of their evil ways. When they came to Mount Sinai, they camped there for 2 years. During this time, God passed down his 10 Commandments and the other laws covering how they must govern themselves when they would go into the Promised Land. While God was giving the laws to the people from the top of Mount Sinai, the people complained to Moses that they were afraid of God's tremendous voice, and they wanted Moses to get the laws from God and relay the information. Moses went to the top of the mountain and met with God. He was there for 40 days. When he came back down the mountain, he found that the people were worshiping a golden calf that they had Aaron build. Moses was so mad that he threw down the 2 tablets of laws and broke them. He called out to the people asking who was on God's side. Only the Levi tribe stepped forward. Moses had the Levites slay the 3,000 Israelites who worshiped the golden calf. God was so upset with the Israelites that he told them he was leaving them and would send an angel to guide them. Moses knew that they would not be able to make the journey if God wasn't with them to protect and keep them safe. So Moses separated his tent from the others to be a temporary tabernacle for God. The people took off all their gold and jewelry for the building of the real tabernacle. God then agreed to stay with them, and he called Moses to the mountain again to make new tablets for the 10 Commandments and to provide the instructions for the building of the tabernacle and its furnishings. He was making a covenant with the Israeli people. He would bless them and protect them, and they would overtake the tribes of Canaan and destroy their altars and idols. So the Israelites built the real tabernacle, and God continued leading them by the column of cloud and the column of fire. We will continue the journey of the Israelites in the book of Leviticus. We have started uploading the videos covering each book of the Bible and plan to add a book every month. As of this writing, the books of Genesis through Ruth are on the channel, including a short 4-minute introduction to the Bible. Please don't forget to click on the like and subscribe buttons below the screen to help us witness to others. You can also leave a comment if you like. We answer all comments. If you would like to send this video to friends or family members, please use the share button below. Then click on the next video icon to continue the journey through the Bible. You can also click on the channel icon to see all the videos available. Thank you for watching this video. May God richly bless you and your family.